Last week, Andras Hosh and I talked about how change begins with the stories we tell and the small acts of attention that extend outward. This week, we stay grounded, literally, with writer Tamara Dean. Her work reminds us that connection and renewal begin right where we live, in our own communities, on our own landscapes, and in our daily choices. You're listening to Wild Connection, where every conversation is a journey into what it means to be part of this wild and complicated world. I'm your host, Dr. Jen, and I talk with scientists, authors, and changemakers about people, nature, and the surprising connections that tie us all together. Before we start, I want to let you know that if you're inspired by today's conversation and want to deepen your own connection to the natural world, check out my Audible course, Reconnect with Nature, and the companion workbook, Rooted in Nature. Both are filled with simple, powerful practices that help you slow down, tune in, and build your own sense of place wherever you are. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Wild Connection, the podcast. I am really excited to welcome author and writing instructor Tamara Dean to talk about many things, including her latest book, Shelter and Storm at Home in the Driftless. Welcome to the show, Tamara.
Thank you, Jennifer, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, I'm really excited. And, I found your book to be a really powerful, I don't want to say story because it was kind of a collection of essays, but on resilience, rural life, and what it really means to belong to a place. And so, would you be able to tell us a little bit about what was it about that particular place, the Driftless in Wisconsin, that made you want to not just visit, but to stay, build a life, a home, and a relationship with the land?
Yeah. So David and I, my partner and I, were looking for a place to start over. This was around 2004. And we were trying to find lives that would be healthier than sitting in an office and staring at our computers all day. I had been a fan of these back to the land narratives since I was a teenager, and I always fantasized about doing something like that myself. And I had come from a long line of farmers up until my parents' generation. Everybody in our family had been farmers. So I imagined that the rural life, the agricultural life would come easily to me. And then when we were driving around looking for a place to start over, we happened upon the Driftless area, which is in southwestern Wisconsin. It's about 8,500 square miles of land that was untouched by glaciers. That's where it gets its name, Driftless, because the
Okay.
glaciers push ahead of them and leave behind this drift, which is silt and sand and pebbles and rocks. But for some reason, through a series of coincidences, this area was never plowed over by glaciers. So it has a terrain that's very different from the rest of the Midwest. It's not flat. It's got these steep limestone bluffs and narrow river valleys, and it's just magically beautiful. We're not the only people who've been seduced by that landscape, but we knew once we got there that we wanted to start over. We didn't know much about the community or the history of the place.
Mhm.
We were lucky to learn that as we went along and find neighbors who were such helpful people and supportive people. And when I moved to the Driftless area, I was primarily a fiction writer. I wrote technical textbooks as for my living, but when we got to the Driftless area, it seemed all I had to do was step outside my front door, and something else amazing or miraculous would strike me. And the fictional plot lines I was coming up with were nothing compared to the drama of the real life happening around me. So I embarked on this project to write essays, although I hadn't imagined a collection when I set about writing them.
Mhm.
There came to be so many, and they all sort of, or all the ones in the book at least, contain this tension between shelter and storm. The shelter being not only the house we built, but also this desire for refuge or comfort. And the storms being not only the literal, tornado, floods, and fire, but also our internal storms, whether that's relationship difficulties or illness or what.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back later to the community that you became a part of and how important community is. But one of the things you definitely do is coming from sort of moving into that space with maybe a romantic view that you had always imagined about what life like that would be like. You really describe not just its awe, but also its challenges. And I think that for many people, sustainability can feel like a really abstract or idealized way, but you write about it in a way that's grounded and not romanticized. What do you think most people misunderstand or overlook about what it truly means to live sustainably, or I sometimes like to say in harmony with the land?
Yeah, I think like many people who moved to the driftless area seeking a new start or a refuge, we were naive. We did recognize our naivete, but we didn't understand how naive we were. So we didn't understand first how weather would dictate everything we did. We didn't understand the timelines of nature are entirely different from what we might have in mind. And that came into play, when I set about trying to create a restored prairie out of an old hayfield, I just thought, oh, this will be a few years and it'll all be, burgeoning, flourishing prairie, when in fact it can take decades to restore that land. And we didn't expect the kinds of community challenges that we found. As I said, our community was very supportive, but also it was surprising to me that neighbors would just walk in your front door. This was just a thing they did. So I learned that if I was planning to take a nap, I would lock the front door. Otherwise, we didn't. But, there were so many surprises out there, but also living close to nature when we could just sit in our living room and watch these unusual behaviors from the animals or things we had never seen before, whether that was, a pheasant or a mink peering in the back door, or as I describe in one of my essays, watching these raccoons swing from the top branches of an oak tree all morning and just like monkeys, really scarfing down acorns. So we really had this interaction with nature that we hadn't known was possible. And I didn't anticipate how much wonder and awe it would bring me. And that was really rewarding.
Yeah, well, it's funny, I study animal behavior, and as you're describing, this peek into the lives of other animals, I will never get tired of finding how special that is and how hilarious it can be
Mm,
sometimes. And also recognizing, at least when they're just able to live their lives, they also are curious about
mhm.
us. And sometimes I feel just as watched as I'm watching other
Exactly.
species. Yeah. Or they see that or even sometimes they get disturbed that I'm watching. I
Huh.
I had this happen. Well, annoyed, I think is the better word. Um, so I had this happen last year. I was very shocked because I live right now in Florida on the West Coast, and there's always a series of canals, and I saw an otter, and I thought, wait, what? How am I seeing an otter run across the road now? And
Mm,
I wasn't sure that my eyes were correct, but they were. And so then I settled under the tree and I watched this otter, and it caught a fish, and then it was just sitting there munching on its
mhm.
fish on the opposite bank. And then it looked at me, and it was almost like irritated, like, excuse me, why are you watching me eat
Huh.
my meal? Right. And then after it finished, it swam across and it just stared at me. And I was like, okay, I could see where this is not, fun for you to be stared at. Maybe it
Wow.
thought I was going to take its fish. I have no idea what it was thinking. But,
Oh.
sometimes I find myself when I'm observing them, and they get that look of, hey, stop it. I look away. I try to be respectful and go,
Mm.
okay, okay. But then I'm just so compelled to watch you. And so there's this dance between me observing and being observed, and trying to also respect that they're going about their life. And I don't know what they're perceiving about my close attention.
Yeah, and I have so many questions for you. One is, do you think that the otter's expression is an accurate parallel to human expression? When you say it looked disturbed, do you have any insights on whether they mimic our expressions or are similar?
Well, we know that most mammals and other animals, their brain structures are so similar
Mm.
that they experience a range of emotions. I think I can't say for certain that it was annoyed, but whenever another species looks at you so directly, it's either that I was threatening it or it wants me to stop staring at it. And so
Mm.
if I think about when somebody's just staring at me, imagine like you're sitting where you are and somebody comes and is 8 feet away from you and is pointing a camera at you for 30 minutes while you're eating your lunch.
Hmm.
All right. And so I firmly believe that when you are in tune with other species and even other people, body language is our primary form of communication. We tend to think as humans that we are verbal and that that's the dominant form of communication. But it's just because we are so reliant on language without recognizing that we respond to body language more.
Right, right. Oh, that's so interesting.
And so I feel pretty confident in being able to assess just based on years and years of being with other species. And you have to learn different species. I don't know otters very well. And that was just a gut reaction to the way that it looked at me. Then it swam across and just stayed there staring at me. And
Hmm.
I was like, okay, I get the point. It's not nice. I got it. I'm good. Sorry,
Hmm.
sorry. And that's just my relationship with other species. Other scientists would maybe never say such a thing, but I see my interaction even as a scientist with other species as a relationship.
Right. Well, I have to tell you, Jennifer, about something that was too strange to even put into an essay for Shelter and Storm,
Please.
but I'll share with you and your listeners. We had an outbuilding that served as a wood shop and a garage, and my partner David was primarily the person who spent all the time out there. And one afternoon, he left the doors open and then he went back in the evening to close them. And the next day, he had bluebirds at his window, tapping on the window and hovering. There were two at one of his office windows and one at the other. And he finally went outside because he thought, what is going on? And he followed them. They led him to that shop and
Hmm.
he opened the door and there was a bluebird trapped inside after he had left the door open the day before. So he let it out, and then the bluebirds didn't tap at his window or hover anymore. And I thought, how did they know he was the guy to communicate with? And how did they know that was his office?
Yeah.
Clearly they were watching,
Yes.
and it just astonished us that this had happened.
I love that story for a lot of reasons. One, it shows, okay, that birds can recognize faces. We know that from research on certain birds like crows and ravens.
Hmm.
And um, also that they are cooperative and help each other when they're in danger. So that we also know this from other species that if an individual member of their group or family or friend is in trouble, they try to help. And number three, it shows that other species know that we can help them.
Hmm. Right.
And we also see this in many species, birds, marine mammals, and that's the part sometimes that breaks my heart, right? Because if
Mm.
they see us as something or someone that can help, I think about all the times we betray that.
Hmm. Yes, and in this case, the bluebirds knew who could help them. They weren't
Yeah,
tapping on my window.
right.
They
Because
went
they
right to his.
recognized him. They must
Yeah,
have known he was the one who opened the shed and closed the shed.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, many other moments of astonishment happened too. You were talking about animals staring. Well, I had an interesting experience with a hummingbird who landed on my broom handle when I was sweeping outside the walkway one day, and just sat there and stared at me. And we looked into each other's eyes, and it was just a small moment that reflected what we can take from paying close attention.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, those moments of just kinship and togetherness with another species is, I always find it miraculous personally.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I have a different story about a hummingbird before we continue, which is, they're very territorial and they're beautiful, but boy, they have a big personality and a impatient temperament with anyone interfering with their perceived food source. And I used to study prairie dogs, and in northern Arizona, there are many hummingbirds. They are migratory up into that area, and I had a bush that I would sit next to, and I guess the time I was sitting there also coincided with feeding time and for the hummingbirds. And this hummingbird was having none of it. I was not permitted to sit near that bush.
Ah.
It banged on my binoculars. It zoomed around me, chirping at me. It was very, very serious. I gave up. I was like, it's fine.
Mm.
I will move. I don't want
Wow.
your flowers. I promise you. I am not here to. So I interpreted it as territorial defense, which
Yeah.
it was. But what was kind of funny to me was, why do you think I'm stealing your flowers? I'm not a hummingbird.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. It didn't want anybody near its food source, or it might have had a nest for all
That's what
I
I was thinking, right,
know,
if it had babies
it could
nearby.
have had babies, and I was just in too close of a proximity to where that was happening. So, I got the message. Whatever story I told about the message, I got the message, which was move. And
Mm.
and so that's my relationship with hummingbirds. um, but going back to kind of how you were talking about the awe, but also nature's timeline, and that was different from your timeline, and how everything was determined by the weather. And so you faced a lot of challenges, from floods to losing crops. And so how have those moments of adversity shaped or changed your relationship to the land and your sense of belonging there?
Yes. Well, when we lived there, we had 7 record-breaking floods in the span of 11 years.
Wow.
The most recent one was August of 2018, and that's the topic, described in one of the essays called Floodways: From Shelter and Storm. But the Wisconsin Initiative on Climate Change Impacts has predicted that that southwest area of the state is going to expect or experience more frequent and heavier rain events as climate change continues. And those floods were devastating to us in the sense that at least I felt betrayed by the landscape. But they were more devastating to neighbors who lost, homes. And luckily, not any lives were lost in that August 2018 flood, which was called a 1,000-year flood. But it eliminated these water control dams that they had created, and a 500 million gallon reservoir was, charging downstream the morning of August 28th. And I thought, we're going to have to evacuate. The sheriff was evacuating everybody just upstream of us. We didn't in the end, but I was left with this feeling of betrayal. This little river behind our house, which was normally about 40 feet wide, had been swollen to cross and encompass this quarter-mile wide floodplain field or low-lying field, and it was approaching our house. We had built our house with the idea that it would be sustainable and eco-friendly out of compressed earth blocks, essentially mud bricks that we made ourselves from our own subsoil and a little sand and a little Portland cement. And in the face of a flood, this was absolutely vulnerable. I mean, any house would be, but
Yeah.
mud in the face of water is not going to stand up.
No, it won't. And so how did that, I mean, that brings you then to the community and the ties not just to the land but to the people. And so, I've thought about that a lot because in our cities, right, we don't have necessarily a really strong sense of community. And so what did that experience during especially that particular storm change for you, your ideas about maybe independence, right, into
Hmm.
interdependence, and for us in the United States in particular, a culture that often values individualism over connection.
Right. I felt a strong desire to help our neighbors who were so hard hit by that 2018 flood. And they had helped us previously during the fire that we had, and also when our rainwater cistern, which was our only domestic water source, went empty mysteriously while we were on vacation. Some people offered their maple sap truck and brought it to the fire station where they filled it with water at no charge, and never asked, what our politics were or asked for any money. It was just that's the neighborly thing to do. And this happens in the country, I think, more often because emergency services are not quick to respond as they are in a city more often. But the 2018 flood brought David and I out to the nearest village once the roads were cleared to help them empty the basements and buildings that had been flood engulfed of all these mud covered goods. And then we thought we would like to do more. And I was on the board of a regional writing center called the Driftless Writing Center. And my friends on the board also wanted to do more. First, we bought books for the children whose home libraries had been destroyed, but we still wanted to do more for the adults. And so we knew of the research that James Pennebaker and others have pioneered about how writing your story of a traumatic experience can help you heal. And what it does is help us, cast ourselves as heroes of our own story, recognizing our strengths and how we leaned into everything we've learned and we survived. And so we envisioned this project called Stories from the Flood. And we wanted to collect the stories of flood survivors, and then we would transcribe them and glean insights from them. We would publish the excerpts in a booklet that we handed out to the community, and also share the insights with policymakers and public planners so that it would inform future climate or flood resilience. And this all happened. It really worked out. I was worried at first because we imagined people would write their stories, but not everybody likes to write as much as we do. So very
Mhm.
quickly, we learned that it would be better for everyone if we recorded the stories. That's what we did. And people indeed felt lighter after an hour or two of us listening to them. And when they connected at this celebration of resilience we had at the end of the story collecting period, where we handed out that booklet, they seemed to revel in this, story sharing and open heartedness of the event, to see their own stories reflected back at them in these booklets, and also to relive the experience with others who had had a similar experience. And then we had legislative aides at that celebration of resilience who came up to me afterward and said, "We never realized that these communities needed much better mental health resources." And even as late as a couple months ago, I heard that the Stories from the Flood project was mentioned in regional emergency planning meetings and watershed council meetings, both in April, as a model and as a way to help people heal through climate change disasters. One of our objectives was also to create a replicable model that other communities affected by disasters could use for their own story collecting project. But we never got around to that. So I always say when I mention the Stories from the Flood project that I am happy to share all the project plans and the scripts and the forms that we used for the project with anybody who might like to create such a thing in their own community.
Wow. Well, I might be reaching out to you about that. So,
Great. Yeah.
I mean, this is the power of stories, and this is what I've always, thought. I mean, as a species, we our whole history is through stories, and
Hmm.
before the written word, and stories matter, and it's the way that we connect with each other, and
Yes.
that's why Shelter and Storm is also so powerful because it so one I admire what you've done to create that for that community, and the impact that it's had downstream in the policy levels, and then why legislators, why it resonates with them is because we're all human and we all connect through stories. And floods weren't the only problem, and fire. You also describe a tornado that was very devastating. And this touches back on the feeling betrayed, maybe by the land. 40 acres, I think it was,
Yes,
of old
exactly.
growth forest was gone.
Right.
And you write with so much honesty about the grief and the disorientation and the sense of loss. How did that moment shift your relationship to the land and the dilemma of doing something to fix it versus letting it be? How did you come to make that decision, and how did this affect your own perspective of someone who works so hard to live in harmony with the natural world?
Right. First of all, when I walked through the forest the day after the tornado, I just felt this sense of not only disorientation, as you had mentioned, but also awe because holy cow, in just 2 or 3 minutes, this 40 acres of woods was tipped from vertical to horizontal. And these huge trees had just been shattered. So, what a force that was. And I hadn't really expected to feel grief. At that time, we had only had the property for a little over a year, maybe a year and a half. And it's not as if I had gone up to every tree and started a relationship. And yet I felt this huge sense of grief. And I thought, I'm not sure what to do with this or where to place it. And then meanwhile, we had people driving by and gawking, but also offering to log the land for us. And we knew that a lot of people would expect us to log the down timber. That's what you do, right?
Yeah.
And yet, I also knew that logging trucks would create a lot of damage to the land. They can't help it. They just are a kind of a brutal force on the terrain. On the other hand, we could use the money because we were still about to build our house at that time. And I was just so beset with indecision. I think I write in that essay that I hadn't before felt such massive indecision. And I mentioned this to a friend of mine, Sanha, who's a Buddhist priest. And she said, "Can you do nothing?"
Mm,
And I thought, oh, I don't know. I
right.
don't know. Since then, I've talked to Sunha and reminded her that she said that, and she said, "Well, it should always be an option. It's not to say that the right answer in every situation is to do nothing, but it should be on the table." But I did think about that, and in the end, we chose the middle path, which was to allow loggers in along the main paths or roads that we had on the property to get the easily accessible timber and take it out. The rest we would leave for habitat. You know, the ruffed grouse and other animals really benefit from that downed brush and timber. And indeed, as a friend who's a tree expert told me, the forest regrew within a few years. It was pretty remarkable to see it. But meanwhile, with my grief, I had gone to New Orleans. I flew down there to talk with people who had lost thousands of acres of trees in Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, which happened just 11 days after we lost all those trees in the tornado. And even though their tree or their forests were plantations, more or less, with these hybridized trees meant specifically to be logged for timber or lumber, These people also felt grief, and one woman couldn't even pass by her downed forest because it was just too painful to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because it sounded like it surprised you that you could, in such a short time, feel such an emotional connection to that piece of forest.
Yes. I mean, as I said, I think in that essay, we regarded ourselves not as owners of the land. Certainly, I don't think that that really applies to property, but or the very word property is nuanced. Anyway, we recognized ourselves as stewards, and in a certain way, I felt as a steward, I had fallen short, or I was being tested by this tornado. It was hard to
Yeah.
grapple with.
Well, and there are implications for how we might have altered and are altering, long-term weather patterns as a result of our activities. But at the end of the day, whether it's through our influence or just nature itself, I always like to say nature's messy, and we
Mhm.
love. What I like about what your Buddhist priest said, where it's an option to do nothing, is that I think we like order and we like cultivated nature. And when nature is messy, it really, I think it shakes us
Yeah.
because it's so unpredictable. And just as a species, many species like routines and they like predictability. And I often, in those moments of seeing the destruction of a hurricane, think, what did the animals do? Where's their home
Mm.
now? Right
Mhm.
now their home is gone. For some it becomes a home that works, and for others it becomes a home that no longer works for a short period of time, or for
Right.
several years, or maybe decades. And so I really admired the willingness to choose that middle path where you left some of it as messy, if you will, so that you could also see it regenerates,
Mhm.
and left to its own space and time, it can heal.
Yes, and within a few years, as I said, you could hardly tell that a tornado had come through. I mean, if you were close, of course you could, but from the road, looking at that hillside that was so steep, and we didn't allow people to log because it was erodible land, um, the trees absolutely grew up around the downfall.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of healing in Shelter and Storm, you also really share a lot about your personal journey with illness, particularly Lyme disease. And I've been thinking about that through my own experience. I recovered from an injury that I wasn't going to recover unless I slowed down and was
Mm.
patient.
Mm.
But I had to, I was forced to, and it made me appreciate even the body's capacity to heal. And so it also shifted how I show up in nature. So these days I try to be fully present, which is somewhat easy because when you're watching other animals, if you're really focused on them, you have to be present. You'll miss everything if you are daydreaming or concentrating on other things. And
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons why I love watching them, is because they pull me into that state of completely grounded in the moment. And so I'm wondering, what did you learn through your own experience with illness? What did that teach you, I guess, about staying present and healing and your relationship with nature?
As I write in Slow Blues, which is the last essay in Shelter and Storm, I had multiple cases of Lyme disease. And during one, which is the subject of that essay, I was unable to get out of bed many days. And this went on for almost 5 years. I just didn't know when I woke up in the morning if I'd be able to get out of bed and if I'd be able to do anything. And for a person who was so active and had so many ambitions, particularly in a life that required energy for chopping wood and carrying it and planting and harvesting and pruning and mowing. It was devastating. I was walled off from that dream we had created. So I had to come around and say to myself, well, what can I do? And I thought, I can look out the window, I can hold a book and a pen, even if I can't sit up and work at a keyboard. And so that's what I did. And I read about fireflies, which I was noticing at that time from our window. And the fireflies in our yard, I just figured, oh, it's all one species. But I learned that there are thousands of species in the world. And I also learned there's one type called slow blue that only lived in the area just north of where our home was. So I thought, I have to see this slow blue firefly. It has a different blinking pattern and hue than other fireflies. So I got David to come with me to a marsh and we searched and we didn't find it initially, and then I got a friend of mine to go with me, and one night we did see it. So here's the lesson in all of that. Well, one lesson was that Liz, my friend, and I were so focused on this marsh because I had read about where the people who named the slow blue back in 1926 had found it. And by the way, the entomologists I consulted at the University of Wisconsin-Madison had never heard of it. They didn't know about it at that time. Anyway, I was so focused on the marsh, and by 11 o'clock, we still hadn't seen it. And we were turning around to go home. And behind us, we looked up and we saw this blue light going from north to south. In the small rise, we could tell by some trees, we could barely see in the dark, but it was behind us all along. This is the lesson.
Uh-huh.
To not let our, I guess, our biases or preconceptions blind us from what's really going on around us. All we had to do was turn around and we could have been watching it all evening, but we did see it in the end.
That's awesome. And I also like to always, think that I'll take whatever nature gives me.
Mm.
And so I often, not nothing against birders, you're wonderful people, but they get very, very focused, distressed, aggressive when they are really trying to see a particular bird. They're demanding that
Mm.
nature gives them that bird.
That's a great point. I love that to be out in nature without an agenda,
Yeah.
to really be open and observant.
And then it'll surprise you. I mean, uh I had a recent experience. I could never have imagined it. And so I was recently in Kenya, and I went to Amboseli National Park, which was really meaningful for me because some of my conservation and animal behavior heroes did work and still do work in Amboseli on elephants and baboons. And of course, I had an agenda. I wanted to see a leopard. I did not see a
Mm.
leopard.
Hmm.
I did see a family of cheetahs. So it was beyond what I could have imagined. I was so like thrilled. And, cheetahs are really amazing. But that wasn't even the most magical. My last day, it was like, hey, let's go early, like maybe I'll still find a leopard, and we drive into the park. It was early. It was like 6:30. It was just after dawn. Like, it was still kind of that in between time. And there was this black creature. I didn't know what it was at the time, and it was just frantically leaping here and there, but not in a scared way, more in a playful way. And it was darting through the grass, and then it started to cross the road, and I'm like, it looks like a cat, and then it ran across and it climbed up a tree and then leaped into the air. It wasn't even trying to catch anything. It just looked like it was celebrating the morning. And it turned out it was a rare melanistic serval. So it was a black serval. And a
Oh.
serval is just a medium sized, small to medium sized cat. And I like I couldn't believe it. And that moment just reminded me, one, like pay attention, right? Just look at
Mhm.
whatever's there. You never know what you'll see. But if we had just zipped on through because I was determined, I'm going to see a leopard, I would have missed
Mm.
all of that. And it also reminded me how much animals can teach us about joy and presence, and and so you brought up a lot of animals, not just the fireflies and then the raccoons and those that special bluebird story. What do you think that you learned from the other your animal neighbors about, how to live both practically and emotionally?
Oh, that's such a good question. First, as we talked about before, it's clear that they're observant and watching us. And I always think when I hear those news stories about, somebody has learned something new about crows or, cats or something, and they say, cats are smarter than we thought they were. And I think, no, you're dumber than you knew you were. I mean, we're really underestimating them so often. And I think that's one thing I took away from being so close to animals, that we are likely to underestimate them. And there's so much we can learn from not human beings, and that they're observing and interacting with us. They're not separate from us. And so let's be part of the family and be open to what they can teach us.
Oh, I love that because that's just what I've been trying to do for a lot of years is there's a lot for us to learn from other species, how they navigate conflict, how they cooperate, how they, I mean, that's not to say we are fireflies and fireflies are us, but fireflies have abilities we don't have.
Mhm.
Fireflies, navigate their own lives. They're out there doing things and seeing what they have to offer us in terms of and what we can offer them, right? Like in the sense that I don't know what we can do for fireflies except maybe stop destroying their habitat,
Mhm.
because the firefly numbers of many species are declining rapidly. It used to
Right.
be common, when I was young, they were everywhere. And as night fell, bing, 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 all the
Yeah.
lights going. And now it's excruciatingly rare to see them.
Yes, insects are declining and also freshwater mussels, as I mentioned in another essay from Shelter and Storm. They have taken the brunt of all the insults we've thrown at the environment, whether that's over harvesting to, climate change with warming waters, to pharmaceuticals in the waterways, to dams, farming and the runoff that it creates. And what we can do, I believe, and I have mentioned this in the book too, is become witnesses who share their stories.
Yeah.
So being a citizen scientist can be powerful because probably it's the same where you live, but at least in Wisconsin, the Department of Natural Resources doesn't have the money or the staffing to keep track of all the species and the threats that they face and whether they're thriving or not, whether they're declining. So citizen scientists make up the gap. They can really fill in the data that the DNR is not able to collect. And from that data, they can make better decisions about, okay, here's a farm upstream, and we're seeing a huge decline in mussel populations downstream. Let's look into that. And it's not to say, they're always going to be Johnny on the spot about reacting to that data, but this is something we can do. And I recently heard about research that shows that people feel more empowered and more hopeful about climate change responses that have to do with individual action or action in small groups than large movements. And that makes sense to me because in individual action or in small groups like a group that's working on public transportation or butterfly habitat locally, we can feel that sense of community and joy and empowerment. So I often urge people to just find that mission or cause that you're passionate about and spend time on that and know that you're making a difference there.
Oh, absolutely. And, I recently completed a course for Audible called Reconnect with Nature. And I have also a companion workbook rooted in nature. And in there is a whole section on citizen science
Mm,
and that it local, right? I mean, it's wonderful if you want to be part of a bigger network of data observation and information. But when it comes to your local environment, I think that cultivating a sense of belonging, which is something that I know you wrote about in Shelter and Storm, that happened as a result of becoming part of that community and being so connected to the land, that people care more about something they feel connected to and belong to. And so I love that you're advocating for citizen science, because not only can the Department of Natural Resources not handle everything, but us as scientists also can't be everywhere trying to do everything. And then, you know, you're part of the solution. And I also agree, I didn't know about the research, and I love that you shared that, but that oftentimes the movements, while important, feel like overwhelming, and that whatever you might do is a drop in such a vast bucket that it
mm.
will do nothing. And so one of my questions for you had been what practical practices or shifts in mindset would you suggest for people, and obviously citizen science participation, because science is just a way of knowing, and it really is for everyone.
Right.
Is
And I think continuing after citizen science, if you're able to share the stories, because,
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier that stories connect us. And I think writing or telling or creating stories also transforms us because it requires that we be attentive and more honest and embracing of complexity. If you can be engaged in the community in a pursuit that brings you joy and togetherness, but also tell that story, share
Yeah.
it, because stories are going to affect people more than facts or charts or academic reports.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that makes a change.
It does. And, many states do have master naturalist programs where it culminates in storytelling. And so I think that can be a huge undertaking for folks who might still be working, but you can be a mini naturalist
Yeah.
and create, after you kind of learn how to be attentive and pay attention and understand the complexity of a place that matters to you. It's, you got to tell the story.
Yeah. And I love that, podcasts like yours are bringing people to tell their stories with others. And hopefully that will inspire listeners to also share their stories.
Oh, thank you so much, Tamara, for being on the show. Shelter and Storm is a really powerful book, and it hits so many critical themes, not just for where we find ourselves today, but just on being human and being connected to each other and to other species and to the environments that we live in. So thank you for telling these stories and sharing your story and helping others tell theirs. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Jennifer. It's been a great pleasure.
Listening to Tamara, I'm reminded that resilience often starts in the places we call home, in the soil, in the rivers, and in the stories that connect us. If you're looking for ways to deepen that sense of connection in your own life, my Reconnect with Nature course on Audible and the companion workbook Rooted in Nature, available on Amazon, are great places to start. They're designed to help you slow down, notice the world around you, and rediscover your place in the natural world. You can find both through the links in the show notes. In our next episode, astrophysicist Ursula Vado joins me to look up and outward, exploring 5 revolutions that reshaped how we understand the universe. From the ground to the stars, it's all part of the same story, our search for belonging in a vast, living cosmos. Thanks for listening.